What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Brand Builder TV, where we want to bring it to you real, raw, and live. And we want to share with you the power of branding in 2020 versus 2004. I am very excited for this episode for a few reasons, and we're going to get into that. But before I do, let me introduce Jeff Tiegs. Did I say that correct?
That's spot on, brother.
First time. COO of Guardian Group. Now, I found Guardian Group. I found Jeff, I believe, through either LinkedIn or Instagram or a combination of both. And I love being able to promote and support nonprofits, organizations that I absolutely believe in. And that when it comes to three areas in my life that's so important to me, Jeff, is kids, animals, as you can see, my company, and the military. You know, so anytime that I can support any one of those three or all three together, I am in with both feet. So that being said, give us that 30,000-foot view of who you are, where you came from, where you're at today, and then a little overview of the Guardian Group, and we're going to jump right in.
Dave, it's great to meet you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Guardian Group on this platform. And yeah, kids, animals, you know, I mean, and military, that basically sums it up. So I'm a lifelong soldier. I joined when I was 17 years old. So I didn't realize, you know, really until I retired, that the things that I was taught, these mottos, Rangers lead the way, the oppressor libere, free the oppressed, oppressors beware. These models that you learn in the military, I didn't realize that they got in my blood, you know. And it's just who I am. The Special Forces motto of free the oppressed. It was moving towards retirement that I realized that's who I have become on this journey, and I want to continue that in some way when I retire. And looking back at all of the things that I had done in these wars that we've been involved in, the things that really stood out in my mind was when we were helping kids, when somehow, some way, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, they were grabbing kids and they were selling them for sex, they were selling them for ransom, you know, they were using them for whatever they wanted to use them for. And there were the few times where we were there to intervene. And those are the things that stuck out in my mind. And we looked for a way to support the systems we have in the United States to help kids, and recognizing that sex trafficking is an industry alive and well in the US. We have processes in place, we have law enforcement, we have laws. I just could not believe that we're a nation that once we understand that this is a thriving underground economy, that we would let it happen, and wanted to take friends that I'd worked with in the intelligence and operations community in special operations throughout the US military, and repurpose them and retask them to assist law enforcement in highlighting and illuminating who these kids are and where they are, and letting them be much more efficient and effective in recovering them and offering different paths to freedom.
Man, that's awesome. I want to go much deeper into that. But before we do, let me give a little bit more context on who you are. So where did you serve? Are you still currently serving?
I retired in November of 15. So it's been 4 years now, which is hard to believe.
Don't blink your eye, right?
Yeah.
And retired from?
So I retired from, there's a lot of different names for it. The common name is Delta Force. People know it as Delta Force. It's 1st Special Forces Operation Attachment Delta. Okay. So that's why I ended up retiring out of as a lieutenant colonel. I came in as a private back in 1987, went through the ranks, ended up becoming an officer, and then retired as a lieutenant colonel.
Awesome. First of all, thank you for your service.
My pleasure. It was an adventure, Dave. It was an incredible adventure. It's my wife and kids you got to thank. They didn't quite have the adventure.
But you know, you make a great point, right? They're the ones that are a lot of times forgotten or overlooked, right? When you, especially a career, one of my good friends, Robert Blanton, is a founder of Warfighter Made out here, and he's 22 years. He was 22 years Force Recon. I don't forget how many tours. But the other reason I didn't serve, but one of the reasons that it's so near and dear to me is my dad was 82nd Airborne in World War II. And my ex-father-in-law, who I was really close with, I just did his eulogy last year, was First Force Recon in Vietnam. And so, yeah, so, you know.
Dave, remind me before we're done on this to tell you a story about 82nd Airborne and combat jumps. Remind me to come back to that with you. All right.
Yeah. And again, I was so blessed that I was adopted as an infant, but when they adopted me, they were in their 40s. So I was raised by that World War II generation.
Yeah.
So, and that was my dad's whole motto was lace up your boots, get to work. Nobody wants to hear it.
Yeah. In no disrespect to my parents at all, they were wonderful and they raised me. But when I can tell you, when I joined at 17, that's where I became a man. I mean, there these it was a Vietnam era guys, and I remember in the hallway in the unit, the first unit I went to was 1st Ranger Battalion, and we were up on the 3rd floor, 3rd platoon, and there was a big mural on the wall, and it said "March or Die," and that was again the same thing. Nobody cared. It was march or die. And I'm telling you again, I'm 50 now, and I think of that when times get tough, even the crap we're going through now. It's just that idea of just keep marching, you'll get through it.
And it becomes part of your DNA.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I believe so many successful military people, when they come out, becoming an entrepreneur is like second nature, right? Because there's constant landmines, right? Maybe just different types of landmines that you have to maneuver through each day. And then what happens is you start to realize that becomes part of your DNA, and you need those landmines to be able to maneuver through, where you don't feel like you're breathing. You feel like you're being suffocated. Have you experienced that?
Dude, you nailed it. You know, and I think that was part of it. Again, as I went through the ranks in the military, you know, you get promoted, and you get promoted out of the jobs you love. You know, and you realize you can't stay that platoon leader or that troop commander forever. Mm-hmm. But doing the self introspection, what is it I really liked doing? And I just like fighting against other bad men, you know, and finding that adversary. So that's that landmine I have to live with. I have to have an adversary that I can bump up against. And then I can't understate working with friends. You know, I think that's where a lot of the difficulty is for men and women when they transition from the military. They just lose that camaraderie. They lose the touch points with those people. Yeah. I've been very what's the word I'm looking for? Intentional about maintaining contact with old friends and trying to find a place to employ them in Guardian Group. And it's still really, really difficult. But as long as you can have one or two, our intel guy here, he was a good friend, and we worked together for years in the military. So just to have him working by my side every day it feels right.
Yeah, you know? It's that it becomes, you know, we hear this so much when I speak from stage. And speak to entrepreneurs. I love to touch on this because of the world we're living in today. We get thrown up on when we hear a hustle and grind. But I think where so many people fall down and they get burned out is they don't know the difference between hustle and grind and inspired action. And when you, right, can identify who you are, and I can relate to what you just said, because I've had businesses where I've had partners that I connect with like a brother, and every day, even when you're going through those shit storms, right, there's still something about it that keeps you going, that you can't really define it other than inspired action versus that hustle and grind. I don't know if you've felt that yourself.
I just wrote that down. I like that term, inspired action. We use purpose and passion. Same idea. Yep. You know, and you almost feel. I almost feel hypocritical sometimes, because, you know, sometimes we have to. You know, we have to promote and let people know who Guardian Group is. Yep. You know, we have this one video, and we barely even show it. You know, because I'm standing there by this riverbank, and I'm saying, you know, I'm a special forces soldier, and I hunt men, and that's what I do. You know what I mean? And in my head, it's what I do. And what Guardian Group is designed to do is that. But the reality is, I'm answering emails. I'm sitting at a desk. We're sifting through information and data. I'm making presentations. It's like there is not the glamour. I mean, as we move and evolve into the full potential that Guardian Group can be, it's going to be exciting. But even those mundane, like you say, I don't have a day at work where I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I here? Sometimes I get frustrated because I'm on my third PowerPoint that day or my 50th email. But the inspiration, again, going back to how you started, who's looking out for these kids, man? I mean, it's our job as men to look out for these kids.
Truly is. My whole thing is, I talk about animals and children. It's really the voiceless, right? And it is our obligation. It is our duty to do that for them. The elderly, right? Is the voiceless, and being able to do that again. If that creates that inspired action for you, that candle will never burn out, and that's so key. So give us how long has the Guardian Group been around? How was it founded? Give us a little more behind that black curtain.
Sure. So about 10 years ago, so Jeff Keith, he is the founder of Guardian Group. So we're the two Jeffs. So people, that's a double-edged sword. You know what I mean? Sometimes I can pretend I'm him. Sometimes he can pretend he's me. All these different lanes. But he started Guardian Group about 10 years ago. So he was pretty early on recognizing that there was a problem in the U.S. because even back then, people were beginning to understand this word of trafficking and sex trafficking, et cetera, but they largely saw it as a foreign problem. And he was in India where he saw it and decided, him and his wife both, that when they got back to the United States, they were going to dedicate themselves to fighting this crime. And his wife continued to focus on India, and Jeff really wanted to focus here in the United States. But it's almost harder to fight trafficking in the U.S. because we have systems, we have processes, we have rule of law. It's not like, you go to some foreign nation and you buy a bunch of girls and you buy their freedom. It doesn't work that way here. We have law enforcement that's in place. So he had to try to figure out how to work within those systems and what was it going to take. And as luck would have it, about 6 or 7 years ago, we just happened to meet at a mutual friend of ours retirement ceremony. So, we're drinking beers on the back patio, grilling meat on the barbecue. And I just offhanded politely, so, what do you do? And he explains Guardian Group to me and where he wants to go with it. And I had already been kind of formulating a way to do this once I retired. And it was like a match made in heaven. It was like, oh my goodness, like this is exactly what I'm trying to do, but I need a place to park it. So, and if you ever get a chance to talk to Jeff, the kindest, most generous man you'll ever meet, he said, come aboard. He basically took Guardian Group, and we split the leadership and we split our duties. And I run, I'm the COO, but I really try to run the offensive side of it. And he's the executive director, and we call him the CEO because we want, you can appreciate it. We have more of kind of a business, go get it mindset than sometimes is perceived as the passive nonprofit. So we came together. I moved out to Bend with my family immediately upon retirement. We were looking for a place to retire in the mountains and finish raising our 2 sons. And if you've never been to Bend, Dave, you need to check it out.
I haven't.
It's currently where we're at with the quarantine, self-quarantine. I tell you, I don't think there's a better place on the planet to have to self-quarantine yourself. You're not doing so bad in San Diego.
But I say it stinks, but somebody has to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been working these processes now, and really we've settled on a super effective way to combat sex trafficking in the U.S. Again, it's in direct support to law enforcement. We do have an education arm. We have a defense and an offense. So our strategy is multifaceted. But I think where we're super unique is our research and information and intelligence capacity online to put true identities to these boys and girls that are being sold online so that law enforcement can take action. So we've had a lot of different iterations. We've improved how we do what we do. We've tested. And I'll tell you what, man, 2020 is the year that we want to explode. This is the year to scale. This is the year to go from, the number of cases we do each year to 3, 4, 5 times that. It's yet to be seen how the effects of this coronavirus and people's givings and people's support will affect all that. But we're excited, man, for all the things you talked about, this inspired action. We're not having the impact yet that we want to have across the nation, but we can see it. We can see it coming. And when it does, there's not a pimp in America that's not going to feel it.
And I love that. Now, is Guardian Group mainly behind the scenes, or do you have soldiers on the ground when you find, and tell me if I'm even going in the right direction, when you find the cells, if you will, right?
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, right? You can identify them. Do you just hand over the intel to the proper authorities, or do you actually have soldiers on the ground?
No, we hand over the intel. So when you, there's a lot of different, we call them INTs, intelligence formats in the military. One of them is human intelligence, and one of the one that we worked with here as Guardian Group is called OSINT, open source intelligence, OSINT. Open source. That's what they call it in the military. What we've relabeled it, because law enforcement doesn't deal in intelligence. That's not even the terms they use. It's publicly available information. So PAI, publicly available information, OSINT, open source intelligence. That's what we specialize in right now. And we specialize in that because you can scale it. So from our little headquarters in Oregon, as we speak, we're assisting operations in Texas, Kansas, up and down the West Coast, Montana. Where else did we just get some calls? We're actively right now today affecting cases all across the U.S. because it's on the internet. The human intelligence side of it, we will move into over time, where we will have people on the ground that'll be much more side by side with law enforcement. Yeah. But it again, as a businessman, Dave, it just doesn't scale. That individual is looking at one piece of information at a time. So that's one of the things we experimented with. And that was one of the ideas when we first started Guardian Group, that we would have operators as well that would work that human side. They would train law enforcement. They'd be there side by side. And it's just too confining, as we grow and hopefully, in a couple of years, we link up again and we do another podcast. And then I can explain to you better on, yes, we have cells physically located all across the United States that are working the human intelligence alongside law enforcement. But our true bread and butter right now is the open source. And it's interesting because I think here's the easiest way to lay it out. The biggest thing we do, like I said earlier, was we put a true identity to these girls that are being sold online. We're helping law enforcement breach that threshold of probable cause, reasonable suspicion. Like once they have probable cause, reasonable suspicion that something is happening, this girl is being trafficked, she's being coerced, there's something that's going on, they're off and running. They can subpoena stuff, they can write warrants. They don't need our help that much. They just need to get over that start line.
Yeah.
And again, when you think about it, law enforcement, they enforce laws. They're not really out there proactively breaking apart networks and stopping crime before it happens.
They can only do so much. There's only so much budget.
Exactly. So when we're able to hand them a packet that has the true identity of a victim, potentially, the group of people that she's wrapped up with, or that are forcing her into prostitution, into trafficking, they can take it from there. So that's where our scale is. We did about 120 cases last year, which some people would be impressed with, some people aren't. Regardless, it's the start point for us. I think we can push 1,000 cases across this country as we continue to build out our systems.
I love that. Let me ask you this: have you seen so how long have you actually been with the Guardian Group now?
Since I retired. So even before I retired, we started. So I'd say about 5 years.
5 years. Okay. Yeah. So great. So have you noticed, or maybe you haven't, I don't know, or either way, since the new administration has taken over, right? Has it become easier, harder, or no difference in the last 3 years versus the last 5?
Both. So let me explain. There's a couple things. When we first started talking about this, a lot of people never even heard the term trafficking. Like they know drug trafficking, you know, and I wish we had a different term, you know, like, but one thing I would say to the listeners also is, by law, the difference between prostitution and trafficking is the element of force, fraud, or coercion. So if prostitution is the exchange of a sex act for something of value, that's prostitution. Now, if that prostitute is being forced or fraudulently brought into this or coerced to conduct these sex acts, that's trafficking.
Or age, right?
Well, so that's the other one. Good on you. The other one is, if the girl is under 18, it's an automatic trafficking charge. Yep. So when we talk about children, focusing on the children, the minors, there's a number of reasons. One is because, yes, our heart goes out to those children first. And the sooner you can interdict this crime, the more likely they're going to return to some normal life if they can. Secondly, it's just an easier process. If the girl is under 18, you're not talking prostitution at all. You're talking trafficking. So for the listeners, they should not try to figure out, is this prostitution or trafficking? Because if you think about this logically, okay, a woman that has a pimp, just like a pimp trafficker is to us is synonymous. Prostitution, trafficking is largely synonymous. Again, not by law, but that's a different topic. If a girl is being prostituted, how often do you think her pimp is forcing her to go out to work, or fraudulently entrapping her in things, or coercing her? Like that, on that journey, it's trafficking one day, prostitution the next, trafficking, you know what I mean? Yep. It only makes sense, you know? The other thing I like to say to people too is this idea of these women that are doing it because it's their choice. They're sex workers, okay? Look, there are women out there that are doing it by choice, but are they? What happened in their life that affected them in a way that sex became a transaction to them? You know, that every person that we've worked with has a story when they were young that pushed them on that path. No. The other thing that I would say is, if these women that are independent sex workers, so to speak, if I was a pimp, why would I allow that to happen? Why would I allow a woman to have a clientele and bring in money if I could take over that operation? So it's the same idea. Even when you talk about these women that are independent, in their cycle of work, these traffickers are going to come and go because they want that market. So, you know, this is much more complicated than you and I are laying out, but I want your listeners to hear a little bit about this. It's just a broken community of people, some that are trying to survive and some that are just trying to exploit them with force and violence. And again, like we started with, it's our responsibility to stick up for these boys and girls that need our help.
And that's the other thing I want you to touch on, because I've been following this for the last like 2.5, 3 years, along with the whole landscape of our political world and what's going on. And now we're talking about the coronavirus, and now it's like 10x. But I've been really following this because it always comes up, right? The child trafficking, the human trafficking. And I want you to speak on this. Is most people that are going to be watching this that don't really follow that, haven't taken the time to really overturn stones, automatically think females. Well, talk about little boys, right? And how prevalent that is, or I should say more prevalent than the masses would even imagine.
Yeah. So let me go back to your other question that I didn't quite get to, and then I'll answer that one also, because you asked about what we've seen over time. So the awareness has been raised. People now understand that sex trafficking is an underground economy in the United States, at least a bunch of people. Government-wise, they're beginning to look at where we're putting our money. Is it effective? Like there's a certain amount of money for the aftercare. Once these boys and girls are pulled out of trafficking, they need counseling. They need safe places. They need literally years to be restored. So we've been putting money into that, but they're starting to look at, we need to put money on the front end. We need to interdict this crime early through education, and then what Guardian Group does with that offense. So politically, government-wise, we're beginning to recognize this. The penalties continue to go up. If you're busted for trafficking, you're going away for a pretty good amount of time. So the laws are there, but our lawyers, our DAs, our judges don't quite fully understand it. So there's a lot of plea bargaining down to just pimping or even lesser charges. So there we've seen that, but there's a growth market. And then there were some things that were enacted. I think it's coming up on 2 years. I think it was 2 years ago in March, when the administration passed. It's called the FOSTA-SESTA Act, which basically started to hold hosting sites online accountable for selling children. Yeah. And the biggie was Backpage. People knew of Backpage. It hit the news. Backpage got sued. A bunch of those guys, I don't think they did prison time, but they basically went out of business.
Which was a Craigslist or a platform,
yes,
correct?
Yes, yeah. It was exactly. That's a good way of putting it. It's like Craigslist for buying girls.
That platform, and I believe you're right. Like 2 years ago, the founder or something was prosecuted.
Yep.
Indicted and prosecuted.
Yeah, the 3 men that were prosecuted, and they were prosecuted largely because they had evidence that showed they knew minors were being sold on their site, and they just looked the other way. Yeah. So this legislation went into effect, and it took a huge bite out of online sex trafficking. But what ended up happening was all of these sites just relocated overseas, because American laws, if you're hosted in Europe or somewhere else overseas, they don't affect. So instead of Backpage having the monopoly on the market, now there's 5, 6, 10 other Craigslist type sites for buying girls. And what they've also done is they're hiding much better where the minors are at. So it's harder for us to find the minors online. It takes a little bit of work from law enforcement to do a couple of stings to start to peel away the onion. So that's basically what we've seen. In many places, it's harder to do what we do now than a few years ago. It has forced some of the online traffic to the street. So there's a little bit more street prostitution that's popping up that people begin to see. But we don't really deal with the street prostitution. So when we're talking about things, it's mostly what is happening online, the commercial sex online. And getting to your question about boys is the same thing. It's not really what we look at. Okay, so for a number of reasons, looking at women being exploited and young girls being exploited is one thing. Looking at the boys, like I just don't want to see that. You know what I mean? Like as Guardian Group, we kind of pick and choose the sectors that we focus on, and we just don't pursue that side of it. We do know about it, and I'll answer your question, but just to make it clear, it's not our specialty. And one of the other reasons it's not our specialty is because the market's much smaller. Okay, when you're talking about the sex industry, there are hundreds of thousands, millions of men in America that are willing to purchase sex. Again, I'm not trying to paint anyone with a brush. I think statistically, it's like 12%. I think a report that came out, it was like 10 or 12% of men in their lifetimes ever buy a prostitute. And it's like 3 to 5% of men are like these habitual buyers. So again, let's be a little bit fair to men like you and I. We would never think of this nonsense, but there is a market out there. And when you look at that market, what they want to buy are young, beautiful girls. So again, the demand is what the supply responds to.
No question, it's business.
Right. So when you're looking at boys, now you're chopping that market into segments, right? Now you're looking at because women don't really buy sex. I mean, they do, but it's minute, So when you're looking at men that want to buy boys, that's a really niche market, and then where they're being sold at, these are different escort sites. These are different, again, the Craigslist to buy boys. We don't even frequent it. So I think the numbers that they say is about 7 to 10% of the crime is our boys. So it is a thriving market. It's much more difficult for us to see also because they're a little bit more open when they're selling women, because as long as they can take this girl, she may be 15 or 16, but they're saying she's 18 or 19, right?
Yep.
That's the fantasy of the buyer. The buyer fantasy. Yeah, some of those sickos, their fantasy is to have sex with a child. Okay, but most of it, the market is just a young, beautiful woman. As long as you tell me she's 18, then I'm happy with that.
Right.
Whereas the male market that's buying boys, they want prepubescent boys.
Yeah.
Like that's the market. You know what I mean? So it really is approaching pedophilia versus just a young market in the sex industry. So you get what I'm saying, Dave? It's two different things. Part of it is I got to keep my mind at least a little bit clean. I don't want to look at this crap. And then secondly is we're trying to attack what we see as the largest market, and not getting into these niche markets quite yet.
Yeah, and something could happen down the road. And the reason I ask you about the administration is because of the executive order that was signed back in 2017, December 23rd. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Is that the FOSTA SESTA?
I don't know. I don't know what that is, but here's the executive order signed by President Trump, and I think it was December 21st or 23rd of 2017, was any individual or corporation found guilty of human trafficking / child trafficking, they can now seize their assets. And I don't believe that there's been a lot of coincidences in the last few years that, we're seeing a lot of CEOs of major corporations stepping down. I have to believe that there's got to be some sort of trail to that executive order.
That is a very good example, Dave, of legislation that's being passed that is well intended. It's having some marginal effects, but again, it's all geared towards the future. So that legislation is designed to get funding, restitution. So like if you bust a John, right? What are you going to take from a John? What does he have? There's not much to take. But a company or a corporation that's looking the other way, you can sue them and take dollars, and then those dollars are intended to be pushed back into recovery, restitution, education programs for these victims. It's just not quite there yet. Just like I think it was this past January, the administration named a new position that's going to be focused on sex trafficking, on human trafficking. I don't think they filled that position yet, but it's good news that people are addressing it. So I guess look at it this way: we're beginning to set the framework. We're beginning to have laws in place. We're beginning to hold people accountable, but we are far from being effective yet. So I'm pretty satisfied with both the last administration and the current administration on what they're doing from the tippy top level, and trying to push stuff down. And we at Guardian Group are working with local law enforcement and these local task forces. And when we meet, from the grassroots level to the top, I think is where we're going to see that magic. And it's probably a couple years out. But yes, the bed work is being laid in multiple areas to really bring this crime to the forefront and combat it effectively. I
believe so. And I believe we're actually seeing some effects of that now. And like anything, right? When you put it into place, there is a gestation period, right? Yeah. There's always a gestation period. But the great news is it's at least in place, like you said. Now let's take that next step. So where do you see Guardian Group in 2020? And I would say the next 5 years.
So it's time for us to scale. So really the thing, and I'm still not wholly comfortable talking about this. I'm not the funding guy. Our limitation is funding. That's what it is. I mean, we've got to hire more intelligence people. We literally have men and women coming from every 3-letter agency, in the government in the United States, every different military chapter that are waiting to come on board and repurpose themselves, like you said, with this inspired action to fight this new crime. And they need a salary. That's the number one thing that we're trying to pull in. And then some technology developments. I won't talk about it on the air, but we've got some ideas on how we're really gonna really going to scale this. So instead of, you know, we're pretty good wired right now up and down the West Coast along the Interstate 5.
Okay.
But we need to be able to tie all of these cells, these good guy networks, together to combat these bad guy networks. And that's where we're going to be moving into in the next couple of years. First, it's electronically. So we've got the people that can interface with the local law enforcement, local governments. And then, like we were talking about earlier, beginning to place these people into these cities. If money was no issue, we would have a 2-person team in 30 cities across the United States. We would all be tied together with a sophisticated and capable technology network where we're able to store data, recall data. And I think it's coming, Dave. I mean, you know, it's a little bit slower than I had expected.
Yeah.
You know, what I underappreciated was when I was in the military, the budget from Uncle Sam. You know, like I knew that I could personally go to anywhere in the world and take a small team of men and women and develop out a team to fight whomever.
And execute.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I really did not appreciate and how short-sighted was I largely had an unlimited budget. Like it was like, Jeff, take your team and go to this country. Jeff, take your team. So we know how to do it and we're doing it. But what it's taking, you know, what we do in 4 years, I was expecting to happen in 1 year. You know what I mean? So, but what I will tell you again, and I want your listeners to be optimistic and hopeful. It's all coming. We're going to change the landscape of what this illicit sex industry looks like in America. It's coming.
And you already are. And that's the other thing. That,
Thank you.
No, and that's what happens, right? As an entrepreneur, you forget. You feel like you're on an island, right? You forget how much you've actually done. And when you can take a step back, take a deep breath, look back of everything you've accomplished, give yourself that credit. Now that creates momentum. And momentum in the right way for an entrepreneur is our best friend. The problem is, right? Most people when they can't identify that as an entrepreneur, I say this, you know, life is simple, not always easy, but the simpler you make it, the easier it becomes. And that momentum is either your heaviest anchor or your strongest propeller. And one of the best ways to make it your strongest propeller is to look back, give yourself that credit, right? Regroup, bite down on that mouthpiece and keep moving forward.
Keep marching.
There's my rant for today.
Dave, you should be a motivational speaker. Have you ever thought about helping other businesses? Kind of, no, that was fantastic. And no, I really appreciate that, you know, and that's where when I talk to some folks and I say, you know, we did whatever, 120 plus cases this last year. Some people are like, oh, well, that's nothing. But when it, like you just said, and then when we put it in perspective, in the course of a year, our federal government only prosecutes about 300 or 400 sex trafficking cases a year. Yeah. So you're talking about little old Guardian Group doing about a third of the work that our entire federal government is doing.
And you're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, right? You're just scratching that surface. And when you do come across those people that go, oh, that's all, you do two things, right? Number one, you ask them, what have they done? And number two, you just keep moving on, right? That's it. That's it.
Go talk to that young girl that's out of this life now, and you ask her how meaningful these efforts have been.
Right. Yeah. And even if it was just one. Yeah. That's what people have to understand. So yeah, I love that. So you guys are a full-on nonprofit?
Yep, we're a full-on 501c3 nonprofit. Yep.
Okay. So what we're going to do is make sure that we have the links that people can donate, support. Yeah. And I'm sure that social media has been a huge help for you guys with Instagram and LinkedIn.
It's been a little bit of a help. So one of the things I would say too, Dave, is we just released a podcast also that talks about this crime. I'll push you that link as well, because what it is, it's largely me talking. We know we've got Andrea and Amanda, some other folks that work with us. But if people really want to dig into this crime,
Okay.
You know, they can sit and listen to literally 10 hours of us describe in detail. I mean, you and I have just kind of touched the surface. So we do have a combination of support from social media, and then it's these big donors. You know, it's these men and women that have created wealth in their lives. You know, I have not created wealth. I was a soldier all my life. What we've created in Guardian Group is experience.
Yeah.
You know, and to put those two things together, our inspired action and our experience with what someone else has developed and created in their life, wealth and money that can be used to change the world. That's the magic that we're still trying to see come together.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. That's the whole gestation period, right?
Yeah.
Combining those two. And as the COO, you know better than anybody, it's just with the social media, it's just going to keep growing as you create budgets for that, right?
Yeah.
Any other business, right? Create those budgets, execute, create those budgets, watch those landmines, and most importantly, though, enjoy that journey, man.
Yeah.
That's,
I'm with you.
It is. Enjoy that journey. Hey, man, I want to thank you for taking the time. Really, thank you for jumping on.
Let me circle back to it, because I wanted to tell you this story. It has nothing to do with Guardian Group, but it has something to do with it does have something to do with Guardian Group because of our culture and who we are. So back in 1989, remember we invaded Panama. We jumped in for Operation Just Cause. So when you do a combat jump in the military, you get on your jump wings a little gold star, which denotes you jumped into combat. So when we returned from Panama, we had this little gold star on our jump wings, and a bunch of the Rangers were like, "Look, I'm not worthy of this," because they were stacking up our experience against those men of the 82nd Airborne that jumped into D-Day, you know, that jumped into Market Garden, and what they had to go through. And they're like, "Look, you know, how can I wear this compared to our history, these men and women that went before us?" So it was a couple months later, because the military does a really good job of tying your history together, you know, and there were some World War II veterans. I think it actually might have been June 6th of a D-Day commemoration. So now you're looking at whatever that is, 5 months after Panama. And we were standing there talking to an 82nd Airborne veteran, and he was in a wheelchair. And one of the guys said, "Hey, sir, help us figure this out." And they explained the situation. They're like, "Look, we just don't feel like we can stack up with this award to what you guys had to go through in World War II." And I'll never forget it, Dave. This veteran sitting there, and he says, "Did you know what was on the drop zone?" And we said, "Well, yeah, I mean, we knew a little bit. We knew there was going to be fighting. We knew they had, you know, these anti-aircraft guns and machine guns. We knew it was going to be a fight." And he said, "But did you really know what you were getting into?" We said, "No." He said, "Would it have mattered if Satan's hordes of angels, of fallen angels, would have been on that drop zone? Would you still have jumped out of that aircraft?" And to a person, we said, "Yes." And then he said, he paused for dramatic effect, and he said, "That's why you're awarded that gold star. Not for what you had to encounter on that drop zone, but what you were selflessly going to sacrifice, regardless of what you encountered on that drop zone."
It gives me the chills.
Matter what. It gives me the chills retelling the story. You know what I mean? So to a man, we realized, just like you were getting back to, you have to give yourselves credit. You know, so as a young Ranger, it wasn't comparing ourselves to the 82nd Airborne World War II veterans. As Guardian Group, it's not us comparing ourselves to someone else. It's what are we doing now? We're in the trenches. We're fighting. We're facing up to it. So after that day with that World War II vet, that 82nd Airborne vet, we all proudly wore those jump wings, because he gave us permission to enter into that core of men, and he gave us permission to appreciate what they're doing, what we're having the courage to fight.
And I don't want anybody listening to this to miss this other key point of that. That is, and this is going to tie back into business, right? That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Ah,
He was there. He lived it.
Yeah.
That just came from his real world wisdom, not knowledge. And so many people get that confused
yeah,
and misunderstood.
yeah.
And I love that. That's why I can sit with these guys for hours and listen to their stories. A little bit similar thing is my buddy Robert Blanton with the First Force Recon. When I told him that my ex-father-in-law was a Force Recon in Vietnam, he goes, "You're kidding me." I said, "Yeah." And his whole reaction was just like, now he's 22 years Force Recon, did plenty of tours. He says, "But Dave, you have to understand the time and the resources that they didn't have versus what we had." He said, "Dave, it is night and day." I go, "Really?" He goes, "Dave, it is night and day."
Yeah.
So interesting how, you know,
Those men survived on their wits and courage. We do not fight fair. You know, that's the thing in America today. We don't fight fair. I've got 6 planes above me looking at the objective. I've got video screens of what's happening. We've got bombers. We do not fight fair. Those men that went before us in World War II and Vietnam, man, they were surviving by their wits and courage. It's really something.
It truly is. It truly is. It's interesting. But I want to be respectful of your time.
Oh, thank you.
And make sure that we get those links so we can start promoting. And down the road, man, open door policy. If you have things that you want to promote, you want to talk about, just reach out to me and we'll get you back on the show and we'll do some more episodes, man.
I'd love to. Dave, what a pleasure speaking with you. It was great meeting you. Dude, you're super talented. I'm leaving this discussion refreshed and motivated. So good on you, brother.
Right back at you, my man. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch.